Principal kicks out. Black student regrets. Everything when his billionaire father arrives by air. The hallways of Crestwood High buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Sneakers squeaking, lockers slamming, voices overlapping. But Jalen Carter moved through it like a ghost. At 17, Jalen was a junior with a 4.0 GPA, perfect attendance, and a reputation for brilliance in science and literature. But today, none of that mattered. He wore his uniform like everyone else, a faded school polo and khakis, but on him, it told a different story. His shoes were worn-out black sneakers with peeling soles. His backpack was a stitched-up relic passed down from his older cousin. And worst of all, a photo of him pushing a mop in a downtown parking garage had gone viral overnight, captioned, "Crestwood Scholar or Janitor?" The post had appeared on the school's private forum late last night, uploaded by someone anonymous. By the time Jalen walked into school, the damage had been done. Whispers followed him like shadows. Students snickered, and some didn't bother hiding their phones as they took new pictures, feeding off the growing wildfire of humiliation. He passed two juniors leaning against their lockers, one nudging the other. "That's him," one said, smirking. "Mop boy. Guess brains don't pay rent." The other laughed. "I mean, he's probably going to clean up at graduation. Literally." Jalen kept walking, jaw clenched, trying to focus on the weight of his books rather than the sting of their words. He could take jokes. He'd grown up hearing worse. But what hurt wasn't the laughter. It was the silence from people who knew better. Zubby's teachers. His friends. Even Ms. Douglas, the counselor who once told him he was destined for Ivy. No one said a thing. By third period, even the teachers had started treating him differently. Ms. Hernandez, his AP English teacher, barely acknowledged him when she called roll. His name hung in the air longer than it should have, like it carried a question mark. And when he raised his hand to read the opening of Baldwin's "The Fire Next Time," she called on another student instead. Her eyes flickered toward him, then away. At lunch, Jalen sat alone. Not by choice, but because no one wanted to be seen with the kid whose poverty had become public property. Even Ava, his best friend since freshman year, hadn't texted him all day. She walked past his table, tray in hand, her expression unreadable. He didn't blame her. Not really. Still, he stared at the slice of pizza on his tray until it blurred. He didn't have the appetite. His mind ran in loops, replaying that photo over and over. The night job wasn't something he was ashamed of. He and his father, Malcolm, barely scraped by. Every cent helped. Jalen cleaned office buildings and garages on weekends and nights. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. That night, after his shift ended at 10:30, he'd been too tired to notice someone standing across the street, phone raised. One shot. One upload. And now his whole world was different. At 1:45 p.m., just after the bell rang for 7th period, his name crackled over the intercom. "Jalen Carter, please report to the main office." He packed his books slowly. The entire class watched him with the kind of curiosity reserved for wild animals in a zoo. One girl whispered, "Is he getting expelled?" Her friend giggled and whispered something back. The walk to the main office felt longer than usual. When he arrived, the receptionist didn't smile. She gestured toward the door at the end of the hallway, the principal's office, then returned to her screen like he wasn't there. Inside, Principal Douglas Whitman sat at his desk, back straight, hands folded. His office, with its clean blinds, inspirational quotes, and trophies from a decade of debate wins, felt like a place that demanded power and submission all at once. Whitman didn't speak right away. He adjusted his cufflinks, then looked up with a faint, practiced smile. "Jalen," he said, his voice almost warm. "Take a seat." Jalen sat but said nothing. "I'll get right to it," Whitman began. "You're an impressive student, top of your class, no disciplinary history. You're the kind of kid any principal would be proud of." Jalen raised an eyebrow, confused. "But," Whitman continued, his tone shifting slightly, "this school has standards, a reputation, and recent events." He gestured vaguely toward a manila folder on his desk. "Have put that at risk." "You mean the photo?" Jalen said quietly. "I didn't say that," Whitman replied. "But let's be honest. Optics matter. We're days away from an accreditation review. We can't afford distractions." "Controversy. So I'm a distraction now?" Jalen asked, voice low but firm. Whitman leaned back. "You're not in trouble." "This isn't a punishment. It's a pause, a short break from classes. Just until things cool down." Jalen stared at him. "Are you suspending me?" No, Whitman said, smiling tightly. "We're calling it a leave of absence. You're welcome to reapply next semester." Jalen's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to shout, but the words wouldn't come. He looked down at his hands, rough from work, calloused like his father's. He had done nothing wrong. He had followed every rule, and yet here he was, being asked to disappear. "Does my dad know?" he asked. Whitman's smile thinned. "That's up to you." Jalen stood. His chair scraped loudly against the polished floor. "So you're kicking me out because I work?" "I'm not kicking you out, Jalen," Whitman said. "I'm protecting this school." Jalen looked at him one last time, memorizing the lines on his face, the smug serenity of a man who thought he'd never be questioned. Then he left without another word. As he walked past the reception desk, the secretary glanced up and quickly looked away. Outside, the air felt heavier. The sun glared down on the concrete. Students filed into their buses or lined up for after-school activities, laughing, shouting, free. Jalen stood still. He didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, he walked. Past the school's wrought iron gate, past the gas station on 8th Street, past the alley behind Lorenzo's Deli where he sometimes took his lunch break. He kept walking until his feet ached, until he reached the rundown apartment where he and Malcolm lived on the 2nd floor. Inside, his father was asleep on the couch, TV still glowing. The man looked older than his years, with tired eyes and a body worn from too much work and too little rest. Jalen watched him for a moment. Then he turned, went into the bathroom, shut the door, and let the silence swallow him whole. That night, Ava finally texted, "I'm sorry. I didn't know they'd do that to you." He stared at the message but didn't reply. Not yet. In the darkness of his room, Jalen lay awake, replaying the day. The shame. The rage, the injustice. Then, just before sleep took him, he whispered something to no one. "I'm not done." And he meant it. The next morning, Jalen Carter didn't wake up to an alarm. There was no reason to. His textbooks sat untouched on the corner of his desk, still in the same spot he'd left them the night before. The uniform he normally ironed with care was draped over the chair, wrinkled and forgotten. For the first time since his freshman year, there was no school to go to. In the kitchen, the sound of a frying pan sizzled softly. His father, Malcolm, moved slowly across the linoleum floor, still limping slightly from an old knee injury he got while working construction years ago. The man barely slept, but he always cooked breakfast for Jalen when he could. Eggs, toast, and whatever fruit wasn't too bruised to eat. "You're gonna be late if you don't get a move on," Malcolm called from the stove without turning around. Jalen sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. I'm not going to school today, he said flatly. The spatula paused in mid-air. Malcolm turned, brow furrowed. You sick? Jalen hesitated. His lips parted, then closed again. He wanted to say it. He wanted to tell the truth. But how do you explain that you've been silently erased? Nah, he said finally. I got a shift today. Extra hours. Mr. Dorsey called me in. Malcolm nodded slowly, then turned back to the stove. Make sure you eat first. That was it. No questions, no digging. Just trust. By 9 a.m., Jalen was at Midtown Auto on North Franklin Street, the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked. Rust-colored bricks, oil-stained floors, a flickering neon sign that read Certified Mechanics, and the steady sound of socket wrenches clicking in rhythm. The shop smelled like grease, burned rubber, and overbrewed coffee. He didn't tell Mr. Dorsey why he was suddenly available to work weekdays. He just showed up, pulled on a pair of gloves, and got to work. The others didn't ask either. Most of the guys at the shop were ex-cons or high school dropouts who didn't believe in talking unless it was about cars or betting lines. Here, Jalen wasn't the top student or the janitor. He was the kid who knew how to replace brake pads and didn't complain when the work was dirty. During his break, Jalen sat out back on a plastic crate, sipping water from a dented bottle. He checked his phone. No new texts. No calls. He clicked on the school forum. The post was still there, over 100 comments now. Some defending him, most laughing. The title had been updated. Mop Boy dropped out. Crestwood back to prestige. His jaw tightened. A message notification popped up. It was Ava again. Jalen, please talk to me. I didn't know they were going to do that. I swear, I just wanted people to stop clowning you. He read it twice, then put the phone down. Around 2 p.m., Malcolm showed up at the shop. Jalen was under a Chevy Tahoe, tightening the bolts on the exhaust manifold when his father's work boots stopped near the bumper. Didn't know you were working full-time, Malcolm said quietly. Jalen slid out from under the car, sweat streaking down his temple. I picked up some shifts. We could use the money, right? Malcolm didn't answer right away. He looked around, nodding to a couple of the guys, then sat on an overturned tire. You know I'm proud of how hard you work, he said. Always have been. But that's not school out there. That's your future. Jalen wiped his hands on a rag. What future, Dad? You think Crestwood gives a damn about mine? Watch your tone. I'm sorry. I got pulled into the principal's office. He told me I should take a break, that I'm hurting the school's image. Malcolm's shoulders tensed. He told you to leave? Jalen nodded. He called it a leave of absence, but we both know what that means. Malcolm looked away, jaw clenched. I should have gone in there myself, he muttered. I should have raised hell. Jalen shook his head. It wouldn't have mattered. He already made up his mind. They sat in silence, the sound of power tools buzzing faintly inside the shop. Then Malcolm said something Jalen didn't expect. Your mom would have said screw their image. Jalen looked up. It was rare for his father to bring her up. She'd passed when Jalen was 10, leaving behind a stack of medical bills and an old Bible with handwritten notes in the margins. She always believed in you, Malcolm added. Said you had a mind sharper than a switchblade. We didn't come this far to let some stuck-up principal take that from you. For a moment, Jalen said nothing. Then he whispered, I don't want you to be disappointed. Malcolm leaned forward. I'm not. I'm angry, but never at you. Jalen nodded slowly. That night, back in their apartment, Jalen sat by the window with his old school notebook open. He didn't write anything, just stared at the blank page. The streetlight outside buzzed, flickering like a dying firefly. His phone lit up again. A notification. He opened it absent-mindedly, expecting another message from Ava, but it wasn't her. It was a comment under the original post. A new user. No profile photo. Username. Distant eyes. The comment read, "You erased the wrong kid." Then 5 minutes later, a second comment followed. "See you soon, Crestwood." Jalen stared at the screen, confused. Was it someone trolling? A joke? He scrolled back up to check the name again. Distant eyes. He didn't know why, but that username sent a chill down his spine. He didn't know it yet, but someone had just found him. And they weren't going to let what happened stay buried. The following day started just like the last. Quiet, grey, and heavy, with a silence Jalen Carter had grown used to. He was already dressed and sitting on the edge of his bed before dawn. His uniform from Midtown Auto reeked of grease and oil. The cuffs were stained, but he wore it anyway. There wasn't a cleaner one. Down the hall, Malcolm's snores echoed through the thin walls. Jalen didn't wake him. He slipped out quietly, locking the door behind him as the hallway lights flickered overhead. The bus ride to the garage was uneventful. He sat by the window, watching the buildings blur past. Liquor stores, dollar shops, abandoned lots, chain-link fences. No one made eye contact, and that was fine. He didn't want to talk, but that comment from last night echoed in his head. You erased the wrong kid. And then, see you soon, Crestwood. He'd read it again in the bathroom, again on the bus, and again just before the shift started. Something about it unsettled him, not in a threatening way, but in the kind of way that makes your instincts itch, like something was about to happen. And it did. At 11:42 a.m., just as he was helping Mr. Dorsey realign a suspension system on a 97 Accord, a black Cadillac SUV pulled up outside the garage. Not a car you saw often in this part of town. It parked with surgical precision, engine still humming. The windows were tinted pitch black. For a long moment, no one got out. Then the rear door opened. A man in a dark grey tailored suit stepped out, sunglasses hiding most of his face. He didn't look like someone who needed car repairs, more like someone who walked out of a private jet into an armored boardroom. The man looked around the shop, found Jalen immediately, and walked straight toward him. Mr. Dorsey noticed. You know him? He asked. No, Jalen said slowly, standing up. At least I don't think so. The man extended his hand. Jalen Carter. Yeah. I represent someone who'd like to speak with you. Jalen took a half step back. About what? Your school and the post. That got Mr. Dorsey's attention too. He wiped his hands on a rag and watched the exchange closely. I'm not interested in being a meme, if that's what this is, Jalen muttered. It's not that, the man said calmly. You were wronged. Some people want to make it right. But not over the phone. Come with me. 5 minutes. No pressure. Jalen hesitated. His gut said don't trust strangers in black cars. But something in this man's voice, a calm certainty, the lack of salesmanship, made it feel less like a trap and more like a door. I'll be back, Jalen told Mr. Dorsey, who gave him a wary nod. Inside the SUV, the leather smelled expensive and cold. Jalen sat rigidly, watching the man type something into a secure tablet mounted to the back of the headrest. I'm Marcus, the man said, finally removing his sunglasses. His eyes were steel blue, almost unnerving. I work for someone who's very particular about who he helps. He saw what happened to you. The post. The fallout. And he was moved. Jalen frowned. I didn't ask for help. Doesn't mean you don't deserve it. They drove in silence for a few more blocks. Then the SUV turned into a gated property, an old warehouse near the docks. It had been converted into something new: marble floors, high-tech security panels, soft jazz playing over a hidden sound system, a private business compound. Marcus led him inside, and there, standing in front of a giant screen showing news headlines and financial tickers, was a tall black man in his 50s. He wore a navy blue suit, no tie, and held a glass of water in one hand. The first thing Jalen noticed wasn't the wealth. It was the posture, relaxed, but not soft. The man looked like someone who didn't waste time pretending. He turned around slowly. "Jalen," he said, voice deep but warm, "you look just like your mother." Jalen froze. "I'm sorry. What?" The man walked closer. His face was familiar now, not from family gatherings. From Forbes, CNBC, the cover of Business Insider. He was one of the country's youngest self-made billionaires, founder of several logistics and tech infrastructure companies. His name, Christopher Langston. "You knew my mother?" Jalen asked, stunned. Christopher nodded. "A long time ago." "I also know your father, Malcolm Carter." Jalen's breath caught. "You're saying you know my dad?" "I do," Christopher said. "We were best friends in high school. Your mom and I, we dated for a while. Before I got the scholarship that changed my life, I lost touch when I left for New York. I didn't even know she had a son until recently." Jalen couldn't breathe. "Why now? Why come now?" Christopher turned to the screen and tapped a button. The photo of Jalen with the mop appeared. The headline, "Crestwood's top student shamed for being poor." "I saw this," he said, "and something about it. It hit me. Then I saw your face." "That's when I knew. That's when I reached out to Malcolm." "You talked to my dad?" Jalen asked, incredulous. "He didn't want me to tell you at first." "Said you needed to stand on your own, said he didn't want charity." "Sounds like him," Jalen murmured. "But this isn't charity, Jalen." "I'm not here to hand you a blank check. I'm here because what that school did to you is wrong, not just morally. Legally. And I want to help you fight back, if you want to." Jalen sat down heavily in the leather chair nearby. His head spun. "You want to sue them?" Christopher smiled faintly. "Not yet. I want to give them a chance to fix it." Jalen looked up. "And if they don't? Then we make sure the world sees exactly what Crestwood is protecting. Image over integrity." There was a long pause. Jalen folded his hands. "So what do you want from me?" "I want you to keep doing what you've already been doing, working hard, being brilliant. And when the time comes, I want you standing next to me, not as a victim, but as someone who had every right to be in that school. Every right to dream." "And what if they try to bury it again?" Jalen asked. Christopher looked him in the eye. "Then we stop asking for seats at the table. And we build our own." Outside, a storm was starting to roll in. Clouds gathered like judgment in the sky. But inside that room, Jalen felt something unfamiliar swell in his chest. Power, not borrowed. The man who the internet called Mop Boy had just been handed the most dangerous thing a system could fear: a voice and a billion-dollar microphone. By Monday morning, the halls of Crestwood High were buzzing with the usual controlled chaos: lockers slamming, basketballs thumping against the walls near the gym, teachers sipping bitter coffee while pretending not to see phones out during homeroom. It was just another typical start to the week, until Principal Raymond Stokes walked into his office and saw the envelope. It was resting on the center of his mahogany desk like a dropped match on dry grass. No return address, just his name typed in clean block letters, R. Stokes. He frowned, cautiously peeling it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a flash drive. We need to talk. Today, you're out of time? He stared at it for a long second before calling his assistant. Claire, he said, did anyone come in this morning? Anyone unusual? No, sir, she answered from the speaker. Building's been quiet. Students haven't even started checking in yet. He didn't respond. He simply picked up the flash drive, slid it into his desktop tower, and waited. What loaded was a clip. 1 minute, 32 seconds long. It showed a student in a Crestwood janitor's uniform being told to take a break indefinitely by someone off camera. The voice was unmistakably his. It was the meeting with Jalen. He cursed under his breath, slamming the spacebar. Who the hell recorded this? Then, as if on cue, his monitor blinked. A message appeared on the screen. There are more recordings, more stories. Make it right, or the truth becomes public. His heart pounded. This wasn't some angry parent or protester. This was a calculated move, and someone was pulling strings from outside his control. Across town, Jalen stood in the foyer of Langston Holdings Tower, looking more uncomfortable than he ever had in the shop apron at Midtown Auto. He wore a crisp button-up dark slacks and sneakers that still felt foreign on his feet. Christopher Langston stood next to him in a charcoal blazer, adjusting his cufflink while glancing at his watch. You sure you're ready? Christopher asked. I was born ready, Jalen muttered. Just took me a minute to remember that. In front of them was a long conference table flanked by some of the most influential media figures in the city, regional editors, tech journalists, education policy experts. Christopher had called in favors, big ones. He hadn't told Jalen exactly what he planned, until now. The press conference was starting. Christopher stepped up first, calm and commanding. His voice cut through the ambient noise like a gavel. Thank you all for coming. Today isn't about business. It's not about profit or prestige. It's about power. Who has it, who abuses it, and who's been denied it. He gestured behind him. This is Jalen Carter, 17 years old, Crestwood High's top student in math and science. Discreetly removed from his school for a reason no one could justify publicly. The cameras clicked. Jalen stepped forward slowly. He wasn't trembling, but his throat was dry and he had to force the words out. My name is Jalen Carter. I was told to leave school not because I failed, not because I broke a rule, but because someone decided I didn't fit what a school like Crestwood wanted its students to look like. He paused. I mopped floors before I did calculus. I gassed up staff cars before I could vote. I studied after work in a one-bedroom apartment lit by a single kitchen bulb. I'm not ashamed of that. I never was. Christopher stepped in again. What's shameful, he said, his tone sharpening, is when institutions value polished appearances more than perseverance, more than humanity. From the back of the room, a hand went up. Mr. Langston, a reporter asked, is it true you intend to pursue legal action against Crestwood? Christopher's eyes narrowed. We are considering all options, but what we want first is for the school to do the right thing, publicly. Reinstate Jalen. Apologize. Re-examine its enrollment policies and the cultural rot that allows this kind of silent expulsion to happen. More questions followed, some skeptical, some supportive, but none could deny the narrative was shifting, and across town, Principal Stokes knew it too. Because his phone wouldn't stop ringing. The school board wanted answers. Parents were already organizing. Students had begun reposting the leaked clip with hashtags like #JusticeForJalen and #Crestwood cover-up. And then came the breaking point. A drone flew over Crestwood High's front lawn around noon. It hovered for a moment, then dropped a small package at the front steps. Inside was a gift box, wrapped in gold foil. tied with a sleek black ribbon. Stokes opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a framed photo of Jalen standing next to Christopher Langston. And a handwritten note on thick stationery. "The boy you kicked out is the son of the man who owns the sky." Stokes stumbled backward. Across the street, a black SUV idled. Inside sat Marcus, the same sharp-eyed man who had brought Jalen to Langston Tower just days earlier. He took a slow sip of coffee and smiled. "Game on," he whispered. Back in the Langston offices, Jalen sat on the balcony, overlooking the city skyline. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a strange, quiet confidence. Christopher joined him, holding out a manila folder. "What's this?" Jalen asked. "Blueprints," Christopher said, "for something bigger. But you'll decide if we move forward." Jalen flipped it open. Inside was a proposal, a scholarship fund. "A mentorship program, a school audit initiative, all named after his mother." "Why her?" he asked softly. Christopher looked out at the horizon. "Because she never got a second chance. And I promised myself, if I ever could, I'd give someone else theirs." Jalen closed the folder slowly, then nodded. It was no longer just about him. Now it was war, and he wasn't just fighting for a seat at the table anymore. He was flipping the table over and building a new one. By Thursday, the halls of Crestwood High didn't sound the same. Whispers were louder. Eyes darted more quickly. Students who used to walk with swagger now kept to the edges, unsure if they'd end up in the next viral post. Jalen's story wasn't just a scandal, it was a reckoning. And it hadn't even reached its peak yet. Inside the school board office downtown, Principal Stokes sat at the end of a long rectangular table, sweat beaded behind his collar. He tugged at his tie, trying to appear calm in front of a row of stern-faced individuals, district supervisors, legal consultants, and, most notably, members of the city's Education Ethics Committee. To his left, seated with perfect composure, was District Superintendent Annabelle Coates, a woman who'd spent decades reforming broken school systems. Her expression was unreadable, but her fingers tapped slowly against her notepad. "We need clarity," she said coolly, scanning her folder. "You're saying the student in question was asked to leave voluntarily?" Stokes cleared his throat. "There was no official expulsion. We merely suggested a temporary leave to avoid further distraction and give him space to—" "Space to what?" Coates asked, cutting him off. "Work a double shift at a gas station while his peers studied for the SAT?" He hesitated. "We were under pressure to preserve the school's public image during an inspection period." "And who gave you that directive?" she asked. Stokes faltered. "The board expects a certain standard." The room fell silent. A few eyebrows raised. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their chair. Coates leaned forward. "Let me remind you, Principal Stokes, schools are not corporations. Students are not liabilities. They don't get sidelined to protect your statistics." In the back of the room, a young teacher named Ms. Ellis, the one who had tried to shield Jalen in the past, spoke up quietly. "I told him to stay strong," she said. "When he got called into the office, he didn't even push back. Just nodded." "I think he'd already learned that speaking up only made it worse." Coates nodded slowly. "And yet he did speak up. Eventually. Loud enough for the whole city to hear." Outside the room, reporters gathered near the lobby. The headlines were already drafting themselves. But what no one knew yet was what was coming. That same evening, Christopher Langston sat in his home office, reviewing a series of email exchanges. His assistant Marcus stood nearby. "They're starting to distance themselves from Stokes," Marcus said. "The board's nervous. 2 sponsors already pulled out. We've also confirmed the Attorney General's office opened a preliminary inquiry into Crestwood's enrollment practices. Christopher didn't smile. He didn't cheer, because this wasn't a victory yet. He turned to Marcus. Did you get confirmation on the satellite coverage? Landing clearance secured for Saturday morning, right on the school's front lawn. Weather should be clear. Christopher stood up and walked to the window. The city skyline stretched into the horizon, orange from the setting sun. He folded his arms. I want this to be seen. Not for spectacle, but for truth. Marcus nodded. The boy? He's ready. Back in his apartment, Jalen sat at the kitchen table, leafing through a stack of handwritten letters that had arrived over the past 2 days. Most were from students. Some from teachers across the country. A few were anonymous. One in particular stood out. It was from a janitor in rural Arkansas. I mopped floors for 30 years. Never saw myself on TV. But when I saw you standing next to that man and speaking your truth, I cried. You made us visible. Thank you. Jalen's hands trembled slightly. He folded the letter and tucked it into the back pocket of his journal. His father, Malcolm, walked in from the living room, holding 2 mugs of tea. You sure you want to go back there? He asked, voice low. Jalen looked up. It's not about going back. It's about going forward and letting them know I'm not afraid of the place that tried to erase me. Malcolm sat across from him. That's heavy stuff, son. Yeah, Jalen nodded, but I'm not carrying it alone anymore. Saturday morning came quietly. No drama, no protests, at least not at first. The campus of Crestwood High had been tidied to the point of obsession. Groundskeepers had trimmed every hedge, polished every window. Staff were on alert. A small outdoor stage had been set up on the front lawn, flanked by the district's emblem. The school board had agreed, reluctantly, to host a public scholarship announcement in the wake of the backlash, but they hadn't anticipated the scale of what was coming. At exactly 9:00 a.m., the rhythmic whirring began. The sky above the school shimmered as a sleek, black helicopter descended slowly onto the grass. The downdraft sent students scrambling to hold their phones steady while live streaming. Teachers tried to corral the crowd, but it was too late. The spectacle had arrived. The helicopter door swung open, and Christopher Langston stepped out first, composed and unmoved by the chaos. Behind him, wearing a clean, simple black blazer over a white t-shirt and jeans, was Jalen Carter. He stepped onto the grass like he owned it. Principal Stokes watched from a distance, jaw tight, hands twitching at his sides. He turned towards Superintendent Coates, who stood near the podium. You didn't tell me this was part of the plan, he whispered. Coates didn't answer. She was too busy watching history unfold. Christopher and Jalen reached the stage. The mic squeaked. Silence fell. I'd like to thank you all for showing up, Christopher began. Because when a system fails a student, it's not just a mistake. It's a mirror. One that reflects who we really are. He paused, turning to Jalen. This young man didn't just survive Crestwood. He exposed it. He challenged the narrative that worth can be measured by shoes, background, or bank accounts. Jalen stepped forward. My name is Jalen Carter, he said firmly. I was once told I didn't belong here. Today I came back not for revenge, but to make sure no one else hears those words again. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the scholarship agreement Christopher had drafted, and held it high. This is not just for me. It's for every student who's been overlooked, silenced, or pushed aside. I accept this scholarship, not as a gift, but as a promise, that I will keep speaking, that I will keep showing up. The crowd erupted. Students chanted his name, reporters surged forward, but amidst the noise, Principal Stokes stood still. Pale, quiet, defeated. Because no amount of PR training could prepare him for the moment when the student he'd cast out took the mic and rewrote the ending. The mic dropped, and the system shook. Monday morning at Crestwood High didn't begin with a bell. It began with silence. Not the kind that came from discipline or order, but the stunned, uneasy quiet of a place that had just been publicly shamed. Students filed through the gates more slowly than usual. Their conversations were hushed, their eyes uncertain. Even the most confident seniors looked over their shoulders. And in the middle of it all, Principal Raymond Stokes walked through the main hall like a man caught in a slow-motion collapse. His office door was ajar when he got there. Inside sat two figures already waiting. Superintendent Annabelle Coates, her posture sharp as ever, and a man in a grey suit he didn't recognize. Robert Kramer, District Counsel. "Have a seat," Coates said. Stokes hesitated. "I wasn't informed of—" "You are now." He sat, folding his hands on his lap. The hum of the air conditioning filled the room. "There's been a motion brought forward by several board members," Kramer began, adjusting his glasses. "An internal review of your decision-making in regard to the Carter student, and an inquiry into patterns of exclusion in previous academic years." Stokes blinked. "Inquiry? We're investigating whether this was an isolated judgment call or part of a broader culture of discrimination," Coates said, locking eyes with him. "Your office has 36 hours to submit all relevant communications, emails, and records." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "And in the meantime," Kramer added, "you are to step aside from all student-facing duties." "Effective immediately." Stokes sat back like he'd been punched. Outside his office, a student tapped quietly on the window and held up a whiteboard marker sign. "We remember, Jalen." In the courtyard, the tide had already turned. That same day, across town in the modest community center near Lincoln Park, Jalen stood in front of a different kind of audience, middle school students. Most of them wore oversized hoodies, scuffed sneakers, hair braided, twisted, or wild. The kind of kids who, like him, were used to being overlooked. He held up the scholarship packet and pointed to it. "You don't have to look like a brochure to be brilliant," he told them. "You don't have to wait for someone else to say you matter. You decide that for yourself. You walk into the room like you own it, and if they try to push you out, build another door." The kids clapped, not out of politeness, but because something in them recognized something in him. After the event, Jalen stepped outside for air. The autumn breeze had a bite to it, crisp and sharp. He pulled his hoodie tighter, just as a familiar voice called out, "You sure know how to talk now." He turned. It was Miles, his former classmate, the one who used to record him secretly in the cafeteria. Today there was no smirk on his face. No camera in hand, just hesitation. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," Miles said. "I thought it was funny. I mean, that's what everyone was doing." Jalen stared at him for a long moment. "You ever think about why that was funny to you?" Miles looked down. "I didn't. Until now." There was no satisfaction in Jalen's voice when he answered. Just weariness. "Then think harder, and next time don't laugh. Stand up." Miles nodded slowly. "I will." Back at Langston Tower, Christopher stood in a glass-walled meeting room overlooking the skyline. He was on a call with Senator Jacqueline Rhodes, head of the State Education Committee. "This goes deeper than just one school," she said. "We're seeing similar cases pop up statewide. Selective enrollment decisions, disguised bias. Kids like Jalen being funneled into vocational tracks while others coast toward Ivy Leagues." Christopher's jaw tightened. "So what now?" "I'm pushing for a statewide audit," Rhodes replied. "But we need funding." "And leverage." He tapped his pen twice, thinking. You'll have both. After the call ended, Marcus entered holding a tablet. There's something you should see. It was a clip, raw footage, apparently leaked, of Principal Stokes arguing with the school counselor behind closed doors. The audio wasn't perfect, but the content was damning. She's too dark. He's too poor. This isn't about ability. It's about optics, Stokes had said, his voice unmistakable. Christopher listened in silence. Then he looked at Marcus. Leak it, but not anonymously. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You sure? I want the world to know we're not just reacting. We're building. The video dropped on social media by evening, posted directly from Langston Foundation's verified page. It caught fire in under an hour. By midnight, Crestwood's board had no choice but to issue a statement. We are appalled. These words do not reflect our values. Principal Raymond Stokes has been placed on indefinite leave pending further investigation. Jalen read it on his phone as he sat on the floor of his apartment, back against the wall. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just whispered, "Good." That night, his father Malcolm came into the room holding an old photo. Jalen's mother, radiant, standing in her nursing uniform, hand on her stomach. She would have been proud of you, Malcolm said, voice thick. Jalen took the photo, stared at it, and finally, let the tears fall, not out of defeat, but out of release. Because something had shifted, and for the first time in his life, the future didn't look like a locked door. It looked like a hallway full of them, and he now had the key. He didn't want revenge. He wanted reform, and he was just getting started. The week following the leak felt like a fault line had cracked wide open beneath Crestwood High. Principal Stokes had vanished from the building. His nameplate was gone. His parking spot was empty, and in his place, the district had temporarily appointed Ms. Lena Bradshaw, an assistant superintendent known for her no-nonsense ethics and brutal honesty. On her first morning, she addressed the student body in the auditorium. "This school belongs to you," she said plainly, eyes moving across the students' faces. "Not just the ones with money. Not just the ones who blend in, all of you, and we failed you. That ends today." For the first time since the scandal erupted, someone in authority had used the word we. In the back row, Jalen sat beside his friend Tyson and Ms. Ellis. He didn't say much. He was still processing, still calculating what it meant to have fought for a seat at the table and now be asked to help rebuild it. After the assembly, Lena Bradshaw requested a private meeting with him. Her office wasn't like Stokes's. No mahogany furniture. No oversized plaques. Just a desk, a few framed photos of her students from the past, and a small stack of policy reform documents. "You've become the face of something much bigger than you ever asked for," she said, leaning back. "I want to make sure you're okay with that." Jalen paused. "I didn't ask for it, but I'm not running from it either." She smiled faintly. "Good. Because we're launching a new equity advisory committee. Students, teachers, parents, I want you on it. You'll have real say in shaping policy, not token input, real influence." He nodded, though cautiously. "Will they actually listen?" "They will if you keep making them." That same evening, at the Langston Foundation headquarters, Christopher Langston held a private dinner for a select group of education stakeholders. There were non-profit leaders, education tech CEOs, state-level policymakers, and one uninvited guest. Senator Thomas Riley. He wasn't on the original list, but he'd shown up anyway, escorted by a smug assistant. Riley had long opposed legislation pushing for equity mandates in public schools, arguing it created reverse discrimination. Christopher approached him with measured calm. "You're far from your usual comfort zone," he said, offering Riley a drink he didn't take. Riley smirked. I'm here because people are talking about your boy, your foundation. Your money. You're stirring things up. Things needed stirring. Riley took a step closer. You might win over public sympathy, but let's not pretend this is sustainable. You want real change? You'll need political power, and power has a price. Christopher held his gaze. You think this is about winning a narrative? I'm not running a campaign. I'm writing a system. Riley raised an eyebrow. Same difference. And systems don't change unless those with seats at the table give them up willingly. Christopher leaned in slightly, voice low but firm. Then maybe it's time we build a new table. By the time Riley left, several guests had noticed the tension. But they also noticed something else. For the first time, someone had spoken to that level of power without flinching. Back at Jalen's apartment, he sat with his dad on the couch, both of them quiet. The news had been relentless. Features on education reform, interviews with Jalen's former teachers, op-eds both praising and criticizing the movement he'd become the symbol for. Jalen turned to his dad. Do you think this changes anything, or are they just waiting for it to blow over? Malcolm sipped his coffee and answered slowly. Change doesn't come fast or loud. It creeps in through the cracks until one day, folks realize the ground ain't what it used to be. Jalen nodded, thoughtful. Tomorrow, I'm going back to school full-time. No press, no speeches. Just back to class. His father looked over, eyes warm. That's the bravest thing yet. The next morning, Jalen walked into Crestwood in silence. No cameras followed him. No one stopped him for autographs, but heads turned. A few students nodded at him. One girl gave him a quick thumbs up, but what struck him the most was what was written on the bulletin board near the front office. It was a handwritten poster, simple and unpolished. The student they tried to silence taught the whole school to listen. The new equity committee held its first meeting that afternoon in the library. Jalen sat across from Ms. Ellis, a nervous freshman, a parent from the PTA, and two school board representatives. Ms. Bradshaw stood by the window, arms crossed, watching closely, but not intruding. Jalen leaned forward, opened the folder on his lap, and cleared his throat. Before we start talking policies, I want to make something clear, he said. If this is just for show, if this committee is here so the school can say we tried, I'm walking out right now. I've seen what it looks like when people pretend to care. I've lived it. No one spoke. Then Ms. Ellis smiled. Good. Then let's not pretend. For the first time in months, Jalen felt something that didn't need a microphone or a protest, control. Not over the world, but over his own narrative. That night, while reviewing notes at his desk, his phone buzzed. It was an email from the Langston Foundation. Subject: Your voice matters. Inside was an official invitation to speak at the upcoming National Education Equity Summit in Washington, D.C. Jalen stared at it for a long time, heart pounding, not from fear, but from clarity. He wasn't done. This wasn't the peak. This was only the climb, the marble hallways of the Walter E. Washington Convention Center shimmered under the weight of anticipation. The National Education Equity Summit was in full swing, attended by policymakers, educators, civil rights leaders, and journalists from across the country. Booths lined the perimeter with new technologies, programs, and research on closing the achievement gap. But all eyes were on the closing keynote. Jalen Carter sat backstage, hands folded, staring at the monitor that showed the sea of people filling the main auditorium. His heart beat steadily. He wasn't nervous, not like before. This time, he knew who he was and what he stood for. He wore a simple suit, no tie, a pin on his lapel bearing a single word: access. Christopher Langston approached from the side, placing a reassuring hand on Jalen's shoulder. "Just speak your truth," Christopher said. "That's what got you here. That's what will keep you going." Jalen nodded, rose, and walked onto the stage as the host announced his name. The applause was loud, but respectful, not fanatical. People were here to listen. He stepped up to the podium and paused for a beat before speaking. "When I was kicked out of school, no one saw it happen but me and the person who made the decision. There was no press, no cameras, just silence. And in that silence, I had to decide what kind of man I was going to be." He let that linger. "I come from a place where kids are taught to survive, not shine. Where if you raise your hand too high, someone might try to lower it for you. But I also come from a place where people fight to be seen, where we show up even when we're told we don't belong." Jalen glanced down briefly at his prepared remarks, then folded them and set them aside. "I was told I didn't fit the image of the school, that my background was a distraction. But when the truth came out, people didn't just see me. They saw a system, and for the first time they asked, 'Why is the system built this way?'" He looked out over the crowd, scanning rows of faces, some nodding, others frozen. "I'm not here today because I'm special. I'm here because I'm not. I'm one of thousands of kids who walk into classrooms with more on their backs than backpacks, who are brilliant, but invisible. And if we want to talk about equity, we have to stop asking these kids to prove they deserve a seat." He leaned forward, voice firm but steady. "Equity is not a favor. It's not charity. It's justice. And justice shouldn't depend on whose last name is on the building or who arrives by helicopter." The crowd was quiet, listening fully. "My dad didn't come to school to threaten anyone. He came because his son was being erased. And when the system saw his wealth, they listened. But that's the problem. It shouldn't take billions to get basic respect." He took a breath, slower now. "Since then, I've been working with Crestwood to build new policies, establish student representation, and hold leadership accountable. Some people say that's a small win. Maybe it is. But for the next kid who looks like me, it's the beginning of a whole new map." Applause started, soft and steady, then surged as he stepped back from the podium. After the speech, reporters tried to crowd around. Jalen smiled politely, shook a few hands, but slipped away as soon as he could. He didn't care to bask in it. He had plans to make. Later that week, back in Crestwood, Jalen returned to a different school than the one that had once shut its doors on him. A new mural was being painted on the east wall of the gym. Students in all shades of brown and black, reaching upward toward a sunrise made of books. And beneath it, in bold white script, "We rise together." The former principal, Raymond Stokes, had quietly submitted his resignation. An internal review concluded that his actions reflected a pattern of subjective enforcement and implicit bias. The district released a public apology and committed to annual bias training, transparent discipline review boards, and student oversight in administrative decisions. But not everyone saw it as a win. Some critics called the reforms performative. Others accused the Langston Foundation of grandstanding. Jalen heard it all. And he kept moving. That weekend, he sat with his dad on the back steps of their apartment, watching neighborhood kids ride bikes in the street. The sunset bled orange across the pavement. Malcolm looked over, his expression unreadable. "You good, son?" Jalen nodded. "Getting there." Malcolm reached into his jacket and handed Jalen a small, tattered composition notebook. "This was your mom's," he said. "She used to write her hopes for you in it." "Thought maybe you'd want it now." Jalen opened it. Page after page of handwritten lines, some faded, some still bold. One line stood out. Don't just survive, baby. Build. His eyes stung, but he smiled. That night, he posted a photo of the mural with a caption. They tried to erase me. Instead, I made room for others. #We rise together. It went viral again. But this time, it wasn't about scandal or outrage. It was hope. A teacher in Atlanta messaged him. A student in Detroit, a principal in Oakland, and thousands of others who had felt unseen. The message was clear. People were paying attention now. And to those watching this story right now, if it made you feel something, share it. Not for clicks, but for change. Subscribe to the channel if you believe that every student, no matter where they come from or what they wear, deserves a chance to be more than what the system expects. This isn't the end of Jalen's story. It's the beginning of many others. Yours might be next.